So the main detriment is that in the U.S., the government doesn't care what we think or what's good for us. I mean, that's like the fundamental problem.
That's a pretty big problem. I will agree with you. That's a big issue. Yeah.
Yeah. They don't understand technology either. Their resources on these issues are generally the tech companies themselves. One organization doing great work on this space politically is Common Sense Media, which is largely a group of parents who figured out that this stuff is toxic for our kids. It's run by a guy named Jim Steyer. So there is, and the data, by the way, is like if you ask parents, hey, would you want common sense regulation on apps so that our kids' brains aren't fried? Shockingly, most parents are like, heck yes. But the parents feel right now to completely outgunned. They're largely ignored by Congress. So one of the approaches I've taken, which you might appreciate, Johan, is this is a very American argument. And it's also very me, which is to say, look, our data is ours. We should not allow these companies to essentially sell and resell it for hundreds of billions of dollars for their own benefit. We should get some of that money. Or we should say we can turn it off. And there is some legislation in California that inaugurated a new consumer data protection agency, and we want to replicate that nationwide. So if you are someone who lives in a state other than California, you should be yelling at your state legislators, hey, why do Californians have data rights that we don't have? I started something called the Data Dividend Project, trying to get people paid for their data, which you can, and when listening to this, can look up or join. Now, the short-term way to get people money is successful lawsuits against tech companies, which most people don't hear about, but Yahoo and Facebook and TikTok are paying tens of millions of dollars for screwing up with people's data. And then, no individuals might get $60 or $80, but hey, it's that's like a beginning. Because my thought on this is that if you can get people excited about their own data rights and possibly getting paid for them, then you can catalyze more popular excitement around trying to beat back the tech companies. But there does need to be legislation. There does need to be a movement. The problem for us here in the US, Johan, is that you can have a movement and it just falls on deaf ears in DC, in Congress. Another thing I've done to try and make these things happen is I've started hiring lobbyists on Capitol Hill who are just like, hey, you know what people would like? Child tax credit. They really love that thing. Hey, you know what people would like? Some common sense restrictions on some of these social media apps so that their kids are more sane and healthy. So I'm working it, but you should know I completely endorse everything you're saying, and we need to go further and upend the business models of these companies because everything else is going to be a half measure.
I think what you're doing is so important, and I write about it in the book, and I'm passionately in favor of it. I think there's another level at which your work can help us to solve another aspect of the attention crisis, if you're right for me to talk about that, because, and it's another place where you have a cameo in the book. So I think the way into understanding it is to go back, whatever it is, 18, 19 months now, to the start of COVID. So when lots of us realized we were going to be shut away in our homes, many people... I remember loads of people saying, oh, I'm going to be shut away at home for ages. I'll finally read War and Peace. I'll learn French. People had these big, ambitious, attention-based projects, and no one read War and Peace and no one learned French.
You know what we did do, Johan? We did watch Tiger King.
Well, that was like a horrific fever dream as far as I'm concerned. But the Googling of terms like how do I get my brain to focus increased by like 300%. and interesting. If you want to understand why, I think if you understand why people found it so hard to focus under COVID, it leads to one of your big and best and most brilliant issues. I interviewed a woman called Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris. So I think you might know, she's the Surgeon General of California.
Yes, ACE, the trauma research. She's brilliant.
A complete hero. One of the most remarkable people I've ever met.
Yes.
People who don't know Nadine, I really recommend people look her up and look up her work. She's an extraordinary person fighting for some of the most vulnerable people. And Nadine explained to me when I interviewed her, stress this was pre-COVID, so I'm interpreting it in light of COVID. She wasn't doing that. She said to me, look, imagine one day you're walking down the street and you're attacked by a bear out of the blue and you survive. In the weeks and months that follow, something involuntary will happen to your attention. You will become more vigilant. So it'll be harder for you to focus on things directly in front of you like a book, because a big part of your mind will just be scanning for risk and danger. It's completely involuntary because something attacked you out of the blue. So your mind is just like, geez, what else is going to attack me out of the blue? Okay, now imagine you were attacked by a bear again. You might well flip into a state called hypervigilance. Hypervigilance is when you cannot focus on the thing in front of you because you are so anxious about what might just hit you out of the blue.
I just want to say, if you get attacked by bears twice, then
you're being careless. What's the thing Oscar Wilde said? Once is a misfortune, twice begins to look like carelessness. I agree.
Are you like walking around bear territory with like a stake attached to your back?
actually, this reminds me of. So I'll finish this point about stress and about vigilance in a minute. But it reminds me of one of the worst things I've ever witnessed in my life, which is I once gave a speech in Banff, and I was in a place where there are bears, so they give you bear spray. It's like mace you spray into. I mean, no one had ever been attacked by a bear, but just in case, as you're walking around, they give you bear spray. But there was someone there who didn't speak English very well, and she misunderstood it, and she thought bear spray was like bug spray that you spray it on yourself.
No,
she sprayed it into her own face. It's designed to stop a bear, and she sprayed it into her own face. It was horrific. Anyway, so set aside that horrific image. So if you're attacked by a bear again, you will likely go into a state called hypervigilance. And hypervigilance is where you cannot focus on the things in front of you because you are scanning for risk. And a wonderful child psychiatrist in Adelaide in Australia said to me, deep focus and attention are a really good strategy when you're safe. Sitting down and reading a book is great. You'll grow, you'll learn more. Deep focus is a very stupid strategy if you're in danger. Right? You want to be looking out for risk if you're in danger. You'd be a fool if you sat at the Battle of the Somme and read a novel, right? So we can focus best when we feel safe. One of the things, well, I think in COVID we couldn't focus because we were scared of the virus. We were scared that our lives had been profoundly upended. We didn't know what was coming next. We're in this bizarre situation. But I also think it helps us to understand another factor that's been undermining attention for a long time, which is financial insecurity. There's evidence the more financially insecure you are, the more you struggle to focus. And it's a bit like the bear attack. If you've ever been broke, and I have, and there'll be lots of people listening who have, one thing going wrong can screw you, right?
One financial setback, one flat tire.
Yeah, one broken washing machine.
Bill, yeah, totally.
Exactly, as you talked about so brilliantly during the campaign. So you can see that we're flipped into this mode of hypervigilance. And the reason this is so important is in Finland, as you know much better than I do, they did an experiment with a universal basic income where they chose a group of people at random and they gave them, I think it was $750 a month. And there were many interesting results, all of which your listeners don't need me to tell them about because you're far more articulate on this than I am. But there was a really interesting one. I interviewed Professor Olavi Kangis, who did that research, was in charge of monitoring the outcomes. One thing they found was a really significant improvement in people's ability to focus and pay attention. If you give people a baseline of security and stability, they are safer and they can attend more to what's in front of them. And they're less vigilant. There's other interesting research on this. There's a guy called Sendil Malal Nathan. Professor Malal Nathan did this research that reinforces this point. He studied Indian sugarcane farmers. And basically, because it's seasonal, at the start of the season, they're broke. They've burned through their money from the previous season. They're broke. And then at the end of the season, they've got much more money. And he tested their IQ when they were broke and when they had money. They scored 13 IQ points better when they had money than when they didn't, because it just screws your intelligence and it screws your attention if you're anxious and scanning for risk. Stress, anything we do that reduces stress improves and enhances attention over time. Another is the increasingly invasive technology and some of the effects that it has on us. There's also a whole range of, obviously, 10 other factors.
Oh, let's do the inventory. We don't have to go through all 10 list style, but some of the others are nutrition, exhaustion, pollution. But yeah, just because I'm sure for most people going into this, they were like, okay, this is a tech thing. But it is much bigger than that.
Well, that was what surprised me. in a way, I started to think about the tech in relation to the other causes, because I started to think of the technology as like a virus, right? It would have been potent at any time, but it arrived at a moment when our collective immune system was already down, because there had already been a big series of changes that were profoundly damaging our ability to focus and pay attention. I'll give you two very quick examples. We sleep much less than people used to. We sleep an hour less than people did in 1942. Children sleep 85 minutes less than they did a century ago. And when children don't sleep, they become manic. The last quarter of the book is all about children and what's happened to them. And I spent a lot of time interviewing the leading experts in the world on sleep. And there were so many chilling moments on this, but one was with a guy called Dr. Charles Czeisler. Have you ever spoken to him? If not, I really recommend having him on your show. Oh, I'll intro you if you want. A completely amazing man. And he did a series of experiments that really haunted me. So one of the things he discovered is if you stay awake for 19 hours, which really doesn't sound like much to me, your attention becomes as bad as if you had got legally drunk. If you just go for 9 days, only sleeping 6 hours a night, your attention becomes as bad as if you were legally drunk.
I'm pretty sure I did that on the presidential, but continue.
You were all drunk, right? Exactly. I can't imagine the horror of that. And he did this experiment where they combined two forms of technology. They put people in a machine it scans your eyes and sees what you're looking at, and it scans your brain to see what's happening there. And what he discovered is when you're tired, and you don't have to be that tired, literally whole parts of your brain have gone to sleep. The technical term for this is local sleep, because it's local to one part of the brain. So you appear to be awake, but you are half asleep. And this is because I also want to explore this a lot, and I go through it into a lot in the book, but Professor Roxanne Prichard, a brilliant person at the University of Minneapolis where I interviewed her, explained to me the key reasons why. When you're sleeping, your brain is repairing itself. It's cleaning itself. Your cerebral spinal fluid channels open up. They're rinsed through with a watery fluid that carries out all the metabolic waste, which she calls like brain cell poop, that builds up throughout the day, carries it down to your liver and takes it out of your body. If you don't sleep, your brain does not repair properly. And so it's literally impaired. And she explained, of course we evolved so that you could sometimes go without sleep. We wouldn't be able to raise children or escape hurricanes if we couldn't do it sometimes. But when you don't sleep, your body interprets that as an emergency. And it puts all sort of emergency measures in place. It stops you thinking about other things. It lowers your cognitive ability. It raises your heart rate. It raises your blood pressure. It makes you crave more sweet snacks. So that's one example, right? We sleep. Dr. Czeisler said to me, even if nothing else had changed, even if all that had happened is that us and our kids sleep much less, that alone would be causing a really big attention crisis.